you, Brianne. So, Tammy Peterson is our speaker. Tammy was raised in a small town in northern Alberta. After graduating from high school in 1979, she moved to central Canada, where she worked, studied, and was married in 1989. She lived for a number of years in Montreal and Boston, but now lives in Toronto. Tammy raised 2 children with her husband, Jordan, and has 2 grandchildren whom she adores. Elliot is the cutest thing in the world. Tammy attended university in the early 80s, studied kinesiology, and graduated with a BSc. She owned and operated a massage therapist business off and on for 30 years. She has taught Hatha yoga and continues to practice Hatha and Kundalini yoga on her own. Tammy has extensive experience in home renovation, having worked as a contractor to renovate their home in Toronto. She also spent 3 years working as a logistics consultant for her husband, Jordan, organizing his daily itinerary on his sold-out worldwide book tour. They traveled the world, giving talks in 140 cities throughout the US, Canada, UK, Scandinavian countries, Spain, Portugal, Australia, and New Zealand. Most recently, in 2019, she suffered and recovered from a near-fatal illness. This experience changed and deepened her understanding of how life should be lived. And now she's going to speak with us about navigating difficult situations.
Thank you, Queenie. I'm thrilled to be here. I feel so grateful to see all of your faces. It's such a privilege to be able to speak with you. Thanks again. I can't really express how I feel right now. It's wonderful. It's really, really wonderful. When I was sick, I prayed to God to let me live, and I said I would speak if he would let me live. And so that's why I'm here. I think Queenie knew my prayer, so she asked me to speak and knew I wouldn't say no. But it's good. It's all good. So I really did learn a lot in the last 2 years, but I'm going to take you back further because I think you need some context, because this is a story that's a personal story. I'm not going to give you any advice or anything. I'm just going to tell you what worked for me, and hope that you can find some words that will inspire you. And so you can just sit back and listen, and I'll try to make some sense. Okay. So as Queenie said, I was raised in northern Alberta, and I had 3 siblings who were older than me. I was the youngest in the family. And I had a pretty happy childhood. I really loved to be outside, and I think that's where God is. So I was an outside person, even though it was freezing cold, 40 below in the winter and dark. The sun would come up at 9 a.m. I'd already be in school, and it would go down before we got out of school. So you didn't really see any sunshine in the winter unless you went out at lunchtime, and we used to run around and to stay warm. So it was quite and then in the summer, of course, the sun wouldn't go down, and you could take a picture at midnight with no flash. So it was quite an extreme environment to grow up in. Plus it was a northern agricultural community. There was really good, because it was at such a height, it was on a plateau. We had quite a long growing season compared to, say, Saskatchewan, whereas the mid-Saskatchewan, you could grow crops. But in northern Alberta, near the mountains, at such a height, you could grow crops. So there was quite a large agricultural community, but there was also oil and gas. And so there were a lot of immigrants coming in and out. There was a lot of money. And there were many of my high school friends. Some of my friends left and worked in the oil field and for natural gas. And so then they had lots of money, but they had no sense because they were like 16, 17, 18-year-old kids with lots of money. They usually had cars and lots of alcohol. And there was a lot of alcohol and drugs in Northern Alberta. In 1979, I think that was when drugs and alcohol were at the peak of use. And that's the year I graduated high school. So there were drugs from all over the world there, because there were oil workers coming from Colombia. They were coming from all over the world, and they were coming here with all their drugs. So it was a very difficult place to make the right choices. Anyway, I started doing yoga, luckily, when I was 13 years old. My aunt was a school teacher, and I used to visit her once a month. And I visited her in the summer. And in the summer, she asked us to tear down the pig barn, and she taught us hatha yoga in the mornings. So that was my summer, tearing down a pig barn and learning hatha yoga. She bought me a book, and I took it back 6 hours north. It was 350 miles north to my home, and I did yoga every day. And I'm very grateful for that, because as a high school student and the confused state that I was in, I would come home at night and do yoga. And if I was drunk, or if I was stoned in some way and I was trying to do yoga, it didn't work out very well. And I would come back to myself and think, this isn't really conducive to yoga, which means if it's not conducive to yoga, it's not conducive to life, because yoga is a reflection of a good life. And so that was very helpful to me. It didn't really, solve my problems, but it did help. So it did at least kind of balance me out a little bit. And I managed to graduate high school. And then I moved to Montreal and went to McGill. And I was thrilled to be in Eastern Canada, because it had been around a long time and there was a lot of history. And so when I couldn't get a job in Montreal because my French wasn't good enough, I moved to Ottawa, which was close by, and that's where I got my kinesiology degree. I lived with some girls, and then I lived with a couple of guys, and then I lived with another boy, and we set up a home, and I was living common law with him. And I was finishing my degree, but I wasn't exactly peaceful. My upbringing had been, my dad drank a lot. He kept his job, he kept his family, he kept his marriage. So he wasn't an alcoholic who was really of the worst kind, but I didn't see him as much as I wanted to. He'd come home at night and he'd watch TV and he'd fall asleep on the couch. And so I just hated the TV. I didn't hate my dad. I hated the TV instead. It was a lot easier and it wasn't as difficult, but it took me years and years to come back to my father, because my mother, unfortunately, her dad was a Scottish immigrant. And when he was a little boy, his mom and him arrived in Montreal from Scotland to meet up with his dad, and his dad had died in a fire in a rooming house the night before they arrived. So she arrived there with no money, and she had a little boy. So she went out and worked in a logging camp, and her little boy was abused in the logging camp. So my grandfather was sick and hurt, and he hurt my mom and her sisters as well. And I didn't learn this until really a few months ago. My grandmother only alluded to it on her deathbed. So it wasn't something, when things are not good in a family, often people don't talk about it. So you don't always know, but I knew something was wrong, right? I knew I wasn't peaceful. And so in a way, I was always searching for answers. So I searched for answers. I did yoga. I went to church. I talked to my grandmothers who were both religious. I tried to find something that gave me meaning. I went to kinesiology. I love to draw. I love to draw life drawing and portraits. I love to swim and skate and play volleyball and curl. I went to the Briar in curling when I was about 17 years old, which is a national curling. But all of these things I did. I got married, I had children. I was doing everything I could to have a good life, but there was something in me that was unsettled. And I just carried on the best I could, as we all do, right? As we all do, keeping ourselves in as good a space as we can. I had a dog for 13 years, and I'd walk him outside, and that was always my best place, was outside. I could find peace there. If there was any kind of arguments at home, I could go for a walk with my dog, and then I would be calmer when I came back home. And I worked as a massage therapist for a number of years, and I loved that. I loved the connection with people, and to be helpful, to give anybody any bit of less pain was always important to me. So I was married. I've been married 32 years now, I think. And my mom passed away in 2007. She passed away when I was in massage school, actually. I went to her funeral, but she lived on Vancouver Island, so I didn't really see my mom as much as I might have. Although I realize now I could have seen her more if I would have made that choice. So I did make choices during my marriage that I didn't recognize I was making, that weren't good for me. You know, my daughter became very ill with a serious illness when she was 7 or 8 years old. She had rheumatoid arthritis, and it was in all of her joints except for her spine. And by the time when she was 17, although she'd been on some really good medication from the time she was 8 years old, she lost her hip and her ankle when she was 17 years old. And and she also suffered from depression, but we put her on antidepressants. So actually she had, from her point of view, a pretty good childhood. But I suffered. I suffered because I wasn't making her, I couldn't make her well. And I felt that was my responsibility. And so I took on responsibilities that were not mine to take on. And I sometimes let go of things that I really cherished. As I said, I like to draw, and I never drew after my daughter was ill. I never drew at all. And, you know, when I remember a painting I did was, she took a picture of her hip after it was replaced, and the scar and the stitches. And I did an abstract piece of art. I painted that. But that's about all I painted. I painted one portrait of my sister's family. Eventually they divorced, so it was really nice that I'd painted a picture of them before they divorced it. But I didn't, and I always wondered, why aren't I drawing? You know, why aren't I painting? But I didn't know. I didn't look, I didn't reflect on myself and analyze my discontent until very, very recently, after I was sick. So I got some arthritis in my knees and my hands, and I stopped being a massage therapist about 7 years ago, I guess. And I thought, now what am I going to do? I'd been a massage therapist forever, and I loved it. And so now I'm going to have to do something else. Well, what's that going to be? And I mean, after that many years, it took me a good 6 months of going, I looked at my husband. I thought, oh, he could use some help. He's pretty busy. And so I decided that I would work for him. And as it turned out, we traveled around the world, and I did work for him. And we had a really successful year-long world tour. So it was good. Yet during the whole tour, I was thinking, I wonder why I'm doing this. I was always questioning, wonder why I'm doing this. This doesn't feel quite right, but it's good, right? It's good. It's good. I'm helping. It's good. About, in the middle of the tour, I went on a walking tour with my sister to Croatia. And I knew that I couldn't walk very well because my knees were starting to really bother me. But my daughter at this point had found that if she only ate meat and didn't eat any vegetables, her arthritis went away. And so I was in London with my husband, and I thought, you know what? I'm never going to be able to walk on this 10-day walking tour if I don't do something radical. So I had already given up quite a few foods. I'm Irish, and I had a celiac gene, so I have quite a restricted diet anyway. But I thought, okay, I'll just eat meat. As radical as that sounded, I thought I'd try it. And within a couple of weeks, I felt my knees getting somewhat better. And I thought, okay, maybe I can walk in Croatia. So off I went. On the last day, they took us down a mountain that I had to use 2 walking sticks and go 1 foot at a time because my knees hurt so much. But I did it. And I was grateful. I was with my sister and a couple other ladies. And it was an inspiring trip. It's a beautiful country. But on the way home, I must have caught something on the airplane because 2 weeks later I had a fever and gastrointestinal trouble. Fever went away, but my digestion never got better. And I went to the doctor and he said, well, maybe you have a parasite. And I thought, oh yeah, why didn't I think of that? Of course I have a parasite. That'll explain it. So he tested me for parasite. No parasite. Oh, okay. He said, well, let's do an ultrasound. Let's do a colonoscopy. Let's do all the things, blood tests and stuff. We'll find out what's going on here. So I thought, okay. So I had an ultrasound, and during the ultrasound, I could see the screen and I saw a shadow on my left kidney. And it wasn't long after that we figured out I had a bacterial infection, and I had that figured out. But during the tour, I had to come back for a biopsy, and they found that I had cancer, and it was like, okay, so then we have to have surgery. But they said, oh, don't worry about it. It's not a benign cancer, but it's 1 millimeter a year of growth. So this kind of cancer doesn't kill people. You'll have to have some of your kidney removed, but don't worry about rushing into the hospital. So in March of 2019, I had surgery and I had 1/3 of my left kidney removed. And I recovered very well. Within 6 weeks, I was walking from the waterfront up to the annex, which is a couple of miles or 3 or 4 miles. I went from my 6-week checkup with my doctor, and we walked in. My husband and I walked in feeling confident, but when we sat down in his office, he seemed hesitant to speak with us and a little bit nervous. He seemed nervous, and he started handing me forms to sign, as well at the same time as telling me that they were wrong. What I had was terminal, and I had 11 months to live. And so I signed all the forms, and they said, well, you'll have to have surgery as soon as possible. And it looks like it's gone into one of your lymph nodes. So whatever was there was more aggressive than we thought. And the kind of cancer that it is not treatable. It's not treatable with chemo. It's not treatable with radiation. If we catch it by surgery, then you have, a small chance of living. And so I went to the States. I went to MD Anderson Cancer, and I talked to them. They said, nope, there's no treatment. I went to San Francisco. I went to a doctor there who was well known. Nope, there's no treatment. So they said, you might as well just have your surgery in Toronto. They'll do as well as anybody else can do. So I came home, and the night before my surgery, we were so nervous, just like cats on a roof. My husband and I were sitting watching a TV show, but we weren't even aware of the TV show. We were just so agitated. And I thought, we need to meditate before the night, because we're not going to arrive at the hospital in any good shape if we don't meditate. And when I was in my 20s, I did a meditation where I was with someone else who was helping me. He was sitting at my feet. This was a massage therapist I'd learned some massage from. And he was not massaging my feet, but moving his hands kind of in a very rhythmic way up the inside of my foot and down the inside of my foot. And that's kind of like the spinal cord of your body and the birth canal. That's what it reflects in reflexology. And so he said he was going to do that, and I could breathe in white light and see what I could find. So I breathed in white light down to where it was on my ovary when I was in my 20s, and I circled white light around it. And about 2 hours later, I felt this real sharp pain on my right side. Whatever that was, I didn't know. But when I had surgery, what they told me was the size of a softball was the size of a ping pong ball. So it seemed to me that I'd whatever had happened had taken the spirit out of it. That's what it seemed like. It had taken the spirit out of it. So I thought maybe for this cancer treatment, I could meditate again the same way and it would do something helpful. So I had my husband sit at my feet and he did the rocking motion. And I had gotten lots and lots of prayers from all the people that we had visited all over the world. And so in my mind, I lined them up on a beach and I had them pray and I breathed in all their prayers. I breathed in all their prayers and I decided it was a gold light because it was cancer. It wasn't a white light, it was a gold light. So I breathed it in and I breathed down to my kidney and I got right down to the cells that were turned away from me. It's like they had turned away. They had decided that they were on a different path than me, which I thought probably wasn't such a good idea for me. So I talked to them, but I decided that cancer was something that was so powerful, it was way too much for one person, and it would be best if it was given back to the universe. So then kind of a black smoke came out and twirled around and went up into the sky. And then I said to my husband, well, I think we can go to bed. I think that's over. We got up in the morning, very relaxed, very calm, went to the hospital. I told the doctor what I'd done. He said that he took the same intention into the surgery and that my kidney and all the lymph on my left side, they took it all out, but nothing was adhered to anything else. It was a very clean surgery. And he was very optimistic that they had got what they needed and hadn't caused too much trouble. And so that was good. And I went home. But about 2 weeks later, my feet started to swell. And I phoned the hospital and said that my legs were starting to swell. And they said, well, you'd had radical surgery. That can happen. So we said, okay. And so then I went for my 6-week appointment. And by then my abdomen was also starting to swell and I had a leak in my abdomen. So, your lymph system is like a spider web in your abdomen. It's the fibers are so fine. It's unbelievable that anybody could. What they had to do was cut them and stop. If you look on an MRI at my abdomen, it looks like I have bobby pins all over in my abdomen. So it was like there were bobby pins holding all the lymph closed and they missed one. So it's not really surprising they missed one. You have a lot of lymph. And if you don't know what lymph is, it are these little cells that go all along your blood vessels, and your heart pumps your blood, but your movements pump your lymph. And the lymph will take out old cells. It'll take out extra fat from your digestion. So it'll just, and it takes it back to your heart and then it's redigested. So it's like a sweeping mechanism of your system. So I lost half the sweeping mechanism of my system on one half, but I still have all the other half on the other side and my other kidney. That's why we have two, I guess. So you can lose one. But so I was at home getting more and more uncomfortable. I went to the hospital. I met with my surgeon and they put me in the hospital. He just said, walk across the street and go into emergency. So I did, and they pumped off 7 liters of fluid from my abdomen that was accumulating in my gut, and there was a leak and they couldn't find the leak. So they didn't really know what to do with me. They sent me home and said, you can eat, but don't eat any fat because that'll make the lymph have to work, and we don't want the lymph to work. We want the lymph to rest, and maybe then it'll heal, because it must be just a little problem here, but we can't find it. So I went home and I was eating, soup made with tomatoes and vegetables and a little bit of white fish or chicken with no skin. I was trying no fat at all. So I was eating there and I was just getting thinner and thinner and thinner. I went from 120 pounds to 90 pounds. And I took a picture of myself, and my shoulder blades were very prominent. All my ribs were very prominent. I had no fat in my bum. My breasts were gone. My cheeks were gone. I was wasting away and becoming malnourished because all the nourishment was going into my gut. It wasn't going to my body, and it definitely wasn't going to my brain either, because I wasn't thinking very well. And I went to the doctor and he said my electrolytes were out of balance, and that means you're going to have a heart attack. And that's how I was going to end. So I went back into the hospital and they pumped me full of fluids until my electrolytes were balanced. I was in a step down room, which is just one step down from an ICU. And they balanced my electrolytes. And then they gave me a diet that was, they put a PICC line in my chest and gave me nutrition through there to my heart so that my digestive system could rest completely. And that's when I started thinking clearly, because I was getting nutrients to my brain. And that's when Queenie showed up and started praying with me. So it was, and that was a miracle. I was like, what are you doing here? But she just, I don't know what she was doing. She could probably tell you maybe she'll tell you what she was doing there when we talk later. But she brought me a rosary and she said, do you want to go pray? And I'm like, sure, I want to go pray. So I took my IV pole and my bag that I had attached to me with all the fluid in it from my system. And we'd go down. The Toronto General Hospital has a beautiful atrium that's 4 stories high and all glass and plants. And it's a little bit like being outside, which is exactly where I always want to be. So we'd go down there and we'd pray the rosary. And I told her my life story and cried and, and then I'd go upstairs and play Kings and Little Ones, a card game with my family, and spend the rest of the day with my family. But every day, about 10 o'clock, Queenie would show up and we would pray for 5 weeks while I was in the hospital. And they scanned me. They tried to find the leak, but they couldn't find it. And they told me that you could live with this TPN diet for a good 25 years. So I could live like that if I had to. So I wasn't going to die, which I told my family, but they didn't look all that thrilled that I was going to have this kind of, I thought, I guess I won't be swimming anymore. There's one thing that I should have said that I'm going to say now that I didn't mention. When I got that terminal illness prognosis, I was at the hospital with my husband. We came home and I was thinking on the way home, I'm 57. I had many aunts that lived this long, many uncles. They died when they were in their 50s. Maybe I'm one of them too, so I can accept that. If I'm going to die now, I can accept that. I've lived a good life and I've always thought I was in control of my life, and I always thought I was a tough person, that I could do whatever I wanted to do, and I decided I'd make this decision as well. But when I got home and told my son and my daughter, the looks on their faces made me think, uh-oh, I'm not thinking about this right. This isn't about me. None of this is about me. This is about my loved ones. And I'm here for them. And they need me. And so I'll do it. That's why people go through surgery and radiation and chemotherapy and all that. That's why people will have limbs removed and everything. And you think, God, that's awful. Why do people do that? It's because of the people that they love. That's why we live, is because we are social creatures, like we were speaking before. Our arms are made to hug. We are here to serve others. And all of a sudden, it was really quite a momentary change for me, that I understood that this was a whole different story than I had thought in the beginning. So when I went back in the hospital and had surgery, and I wanted to live, and I said I would do anything, and I would be grateful for all the care and the help that I was getting. So at the end of the 5 weeks, Queenie asked me if I wanted to be blessed by Father Eric. And so a priest came over and he gave me the Opus Dei novena for the ill. And he said, you pray on gratitude and best of luck to you. You know, you're going down there to see if you can be fixed or not. And so I went down there with my family. I had lots of family around me the whole time, all being very supportive. And I went into surgery and I talked to the surgeon, and he was very convinced that he would find whatever was wrong, but he couldn't find it. They were little, he'd put poppy seed oil and dye in me, and then had an MRI screen, and he thought the dye injected into my lymph would show a plume, and then they could see where the leak was, but he couldn't see it. And when I looked afterwards, I just had like chicken pox he had just put needles everywhere. He'd tried everywhere, and I don't know how many hours. It was a long procedure and it didn't work. So he said, well, you know, this is Thursday, and on Monday we'll do something. It'll be a little more invasive, but we're not going to stop. We'll fix you. You know, in the end, if we can't stop this, you'll have a shunt to your heart. And then, you know, you won't have a bag anymore. So that I thought was a reasonable thing, because really at this point I was just living on gratitude. And so whatever I was going to get was good enough. And I believe that, really, truly. So many of you here, it's overwhelming. Anyway, by Saturday, the liquid in the bag was starting to get smaller. And we'd had that happen before, when the bag malfunctioned and the apparatus was dirty or something, and then the fluid wouldn't be getting out. And so we were skeptical that there was any change for the better. But the doctors had told me, they said, if you're going to find out if this worked or not, you'll have to eat something with fat in it. So I thought, okay, let's do that right now then. So I ate some eggs with some egg yolks, and that's fat. And so I thought, okay, fine. And the next morning, one of the interns came, and his nurse came, and I was eating breakfast outside, and they said, you know, you're going to have to eat something with fat in it. And I said, well, I did that last night. They said, oh, well, let's see the bag. And so I pulled up the bag, and they said, oh, well, it's clear. There's no fat in it. Like, there should be fat in the bag. If there's a leak, there's no fat in the bag. You just have whatever, you know, is in your system. Normally, there's always fluid, right? And that was in the bag. They said, well, looks like you're better. You can go. So in half an hour, they pulled my PICC line out, and they pulled this bag out, and I got dressed and went back to the Airbnb where my family was. And this was 5 days of praying the novena. Not 9 days, but 5 days. And they said that now and then, even if the procedure doesn't work, the poppy seed oil will irritate the system. And it can irritate the system enough that the leak can get scar tissue around it and close. And so they thought that may have been what happened, that it just, it was lucky. And so I went home, and they followed me for about a month. They'd call me every day and tell me just to walk, not carry anything. They didn't want me to, you know, disrupt anything that was going on. And I started gaining back a little bit of weight, and now I weigh 120 pounds. After a month, they said, I don't need to talk to you anymore. You're better. Good luck to you. And I was better, surprisingly. Now my husband's been sick. I mean, it was probably 3 weeks later, I ended up putting him in a hospital, and we've been taking care of him ever since, because he's still not all that well. But I'm better. And I thought, you know, I'm really going to have to really, really be resilient if I'm going to take care of my husband, because he has a very long and arduous recovery. And if I'm not the best I can be, this isn't going to work. And so I was quite fortunate. One of my friends, another friend that used to come to the hospital, she came over one day and she asked me if I wanted to go to an Al-Anon meeting with her. I'd heard of Al-Anon, but I would go with her because I loved her. And I thought that she wouldn't ask me to go with her if she didn't think that was a good idea. So I just said yes. And so I went into this meeting, and when I saw the people in there, I thought, you know what? They're speaking my life. They're speaking just like me. Like the things that they are, whatever they're doing here, I understand. And so then I realized that Al-Anon was a spiritual program, and what I had was a spiritual disease. And so now it was February 2nd. So now it's been just over a year that I've been in Al-Anon. My husband is home with me. He came home in December. So I've been with him for about 3 months. And although he's very ill, and at times is okay, but at times this really isn't okay, I can do it. And it's all because I get up in the morning, and as soon as I wake up, I say, "Thy will be done, not mine." If I wake up and I have, in the middle of the night, and I have thoughts, I just say, "Thy will be done," until I fall back asleep. And so I get up and I pray, and then I take the rosary outside. I have a nice place to pray outside that's on the porch. It's warm in the winter, but it's sunny. And I pray the rosary in the morning, and then I meditate for 15 minutes with a group of mindful meditation group. I meditate for 15 minutes, and then I read some daily inspirational reading, and I reflect on them, because I find that if I read them but I don't reflect on them, I don't write what it means to me, it doesn't work. You have to engage. It's like my mom, I never had a close relationship with my mother. She was kind of cold. She was damaged. But when I had doodle art when I was little, and I loved color. And when she colored with me, there was warmth there. When we would garden, it was kind of duty. So there wasn't a lot of warmth there. And when she used to sew me doll clothes for my Barbie dolls. But she was sewing, I was watching. So the warmth wasn't really there. But when we were actually engaged in the same activity, Mom would color a little here, I'd color a little there. It was quite intimate. There was warmth there. And I think that's partly, I have an aptitude for art, but I think that's why I do art, is because it's warm and welcoming and generous there. And for 20 years, I didn't do any art. And the other day, I renovated my house. In the middle of being sick, I renovated my house. I wouldn't have if I hadn't started the house. If I'd been sick before, I'd started renovating the house before I found out I was sick. But I had wonderful people working for me, and they finished my house even though I wasn't there. So I'm very grateful to my contractors. But I made myself a place in the basement to do art. And so I have a table, and I cut out a window in the wall and put glass on the door. And so there's lots of light down there, and I put really good lights above me. So it's a great place to do art. And I've been doing Zoom meetings of life drawing and portraits and landscaping. And I've been also doing Wellspring cancer courses in art therapy for people who take care of sick people or who are sick themselves. And that's also very helpful. But I did recognize that I was doing art, and my husband came downstairs, and I was in a class, and I was very sharp with him and told him that I was in a class and that he could go, kind of like when the Queen pushes her little button and says, "You can go." That was kind of and I didn't really recognize that until the night when we sat down, and he said, "So what was that this morning?" And I was like, what was that? Let's think about that. And I thought, you know what that was? That was a very old resentment. For all those years I didn't do art, I was blaming you. And it wasn't you. It was my choice. It was my choice not to do that stuff. It's our own choices. The choices, the life we lead is up to us. It's not up to anyone else. No one else can be implicated. And this is a rough one, but whatever has happened in our lives, And this cancer for me was a gift, you know, because now I don't have the same point of view I had. I have a grateful and generous point of view if I can. And I try to stay with my God, who's just a little bit bigger than me. Always, you know, as soon as I get bigger than him, I'm in trouble. So I have to keep him right here. Am I running out of time? I'm looking at Brian. How am I doing for time?
You're doing fantastic, Tammy.
Am I
Thank
doing
you
all
for
right?
sharing. Yeah, you're doing fantastic. Yes.
Okay.
Very good. Yes.
Do I have any time left, or am I pretty
Yes,
much?
you have a few minutes left and then we'll open up for questions.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yes.
Okay, I'll finish up then. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this resentment that I had towards my husband, I told him, yeah, I think that there's some resentment there, and he said, "Good Lord, you know, resentment that does in marriages. You know, we can't have that." And I said, "Well, I'm very sorry, and I'll work through the steps. You know, I'll see what I can do, and I promise I'll do my best." So I went through the steps again. I recognized I had a resentment. I accepted that I had this resentment and accepted that I had made an error, but I'm not angry with myself that I'd made the wrong choices. That's the best I could do at the time. I placed my blame on someone else when it was my own, but I guess I just wasn't, you know, I wasn't well enough to do art for those 20 years. I didn't have the courage to face the necessity to do my own thing and to let my daughter live her life without me, you know, being so close at hand that I didn't have my own passions taken care of. That was my own choice. So I told God I was willing, that I didn't need this resentment anymore. And I asked God if he would take it from me. I asked if he'd please take it from me. And the next day I got up and my husband said my face looked better, that I looked clearer, that I looked like something had changed. And I do think that I had set up the art table. I had been doing the art. So I was acting as if I wasn't resentful anymore. And I think at that point, it was safe enough for me to recognize my resentment and let it go. So sometimes, you know, it has to be at the right time for you to recognize things, like me recognizing that I was selfish in thinking that I didn't have to try to live however possible for my family. That was a selfish thought. It was a much better way to think that I would do whatever I can. And, you know, if I die, I die, but it's not going to be my decision. It's going to be God's decision. It's not mine. And I would be grateful for any help I could have on the way. So I think that the idea of, you know, when you're in a rough spot, to give it to God, because, you know, I took care of myself for almost 60 years now. I'm going to be 60 here right away. And it wasn't until I had something as powerful as this one, you know, 11 months to live, that I woke up to God. And some people, you know, it takes a lot. Some people hopefully it doesn't take so much. But for me, it really did take a lot for me to humble myself and to take the help that was offered. And now I'm being offered to speak to you today. And, you know, I don't understand it, and I won't even try, because it's not my problem. It's just for me to stand up tall and share with you. That's all there is for me to do. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for allowing me to share. It's very healing at this point for me to share with you. And I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, Tammy.
My pleasure.
And we're very grateful with your openness to share with us, to share your experience, and in such a personal way. I think we're all very, very touched by your very personal way of sharing. So what we'll do right now is we'll open it up to questions. In order to manage the questions, I just ask you can each ask your own question. I have a few that have come through the chat and different things. So I'll moderate those and I'll ask you those questions for those people. But if anyone has a question they would like to ask personally, which is fantastic, you can just use the raise your hand function, and I'll see you there and give you the floor. So the first question that we have here is, Tammy, do you think that God permits suffering in our lives so that we find him? And do you think that's fair of God to do that?
I think that God will do whatever it takes for us to wake up. So yeah, I think that suffering is something that goes along with our denial of our higher power. I think that is, I think it's inevitable.
Okay. And another question here that came through is, at one point you said that you thought you were tough, no? That you could do anything and that you'd be fine. So if that's how you defined it then, how about now? How would you define toughness and fortitude now?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me see. I think now is in terms of courage rather than toughness. I still, all the trouble that I've had, it doesn't go away. All the fear that I have, it still comes up. The resentments, I imagine they'll come up again. God will lift them from you, but he doesn't take them away, right? He lifts them from you, from that time, from that occurrence. And so every time we live and interact with other people, if we're not putting God first, and we're putting ourselves first, we'll run into those things again. Mm-hmm. Tell me the question again so I can.
So the question is, how would you define toughness and fortitude now?
Yeah, courage, absolutely. Have the courage to, it's the serenity prayer, isn't it? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, have the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So I would say it's courage.
Okay, fantastic. I'll give the floor now to Emma and Sarah in Calgary. You have a question.
Hi, Tammy. Thank you. This was a really good talk. So I have a question, and it's kind of like very personal to me and like very emotionally hard. So sorry if I cry. But so I care for my grandma. She's 101 years old, and she has a dementia. And oftentimes in caring for her, I get very angry, and it's not at her, but it's at her the disease that's taken her away from me. She was so important in my life growing up. And how do we move past that anger and that resentment towards those diseases that do take away our loved ones?
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. It is so hard to lose your loved ones. But from my own experience, my aunt who taught me yoga, she died when I had my first child. And I asked her where she was when she died. And I thought, where she is? She's in the woods, because that's where I knew her, was in the woods. And so now I was in Montreal years ago after she had passed away, and I was cross-country skiing, and I thought, there's someone skiing right behind me. But I turned around and I thought, there's no one there. And I thought, you know who that was? That was my Aunt Grace. She was skiing right behind me. And my mom died of dementia in 2007. And I know when she was dying, if I was really, really careful, I could still see something of her. If I paid really close attention, I could get a glimpse of her still, even when she was close to death. And I've prayed to her every day since. I pray to her. She's my angel. And so it's a good thing to have my mom as an angel. Our grandmothers, they have to show us the way, and she's showing you the way. She's showing you what life is like, because life involves death. And so it's a rough lesson that she's showing you, but because there's so much love there, the lesson that you get from this is way more profound than if you hadn't loved her as much, right? Yeah. And so, this is something you're going to grieve, and there's nothing that anyone can say to make it hurt less, because it is so profoundly difficult. I know that because you have this love for your grandmother, and you have a family, a supportive family, that you can get whatever kind of consolation from the people who you're with. You can share that grief and that anger and that resentment. If you're recognizing there's resentment, you just pray to God and ask him to help you with it. When you become willing, you admit that you're willing, and then you just pray to him to lift it, so that you can be clear with your grandmother, because you just want to be with her and to join with her as she leaves you. Because the resentment, it's a little bit like a wall, right? It's a protection from the pain, because the pain is scary and hurtful. So you put up a little wall, it doesn't hurt quite so much. But if you can try to let the pain in, as well as your grandma's gift, because she's given you this gift so you can understand the passage of life to death. She's trying to help you to be there and be present with her. So be grateful to your grandmother. Be grateful to her from what she's showing you, and that might give you a little bit of relief, because gratitude is gentle and a positive. When you're better surround yourself with people that you love and that love you, and sit with your grandmother and try to accept what it is she's offering you. Yeah, all the best to you. You're welcome.
Thank you, Tammy. We have another question. There's the participant wants to thank you very much for sharing your story so wonderfully.
You're welcome.
She says, what practices do you find helpful in keeping God above you? You talked about him being bigger than you. So what helps you keep that in mind?
Grow God, shrink Tammy. Grow God, shrink Tammy. So what else helps me? Well, the prayer and the meditation, because in the meditation, I'm just trying to be present with my breath, and I'm listening to God. So that keeps him there. The prayer, it really has to be daily. I think the more rituals that you set up, to read scripture or inspirational readings. Oh, there goes my camera. I'll be back in a minute.
No problem.
So I would say that practice, that very constant, everyday practice of prayer and meditation. And then you can have, there's little things that you can do, like pause when someone asks you a question that feels like you're triggered. There's the 4 obsessions. And the 4 obsessions are really good because with the 4 obsessions, you have to be with all 4 of them to make it truth. Let's see, I'll just write it. 4 obsessions. There they are. Number 1 is gratitude. Thank you, God. Number 2 is being helpful, wanting nothing in return. Number 3 is to be loving of yourself and others. And number 4 is to be tolerant of yourself and others. So the interesting thing is, if you're in self-will instead of God's will, if one of those is missing, gratitude, helpful, loving, and tolerant, then you're in self-will. So you have to have all 4 of those. So then you know too. And that's a very practical way of knowing. So you're trying to respond to something, you have to think, am I grateful for this? Can I be helpful? Can I be loving? And can I be tolerant? If that's true, then you can go forward with what you want to say or what you want to do. So that's another thing that can be helpful.
Thank you. I'll give the floor now to Jalissa, who has her hand raised.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Tammy, for I appreciate it, and it's so touchy. So I have a question, how do you find God, God, light, and the happiness during those tough moments, and especially for someone who has suffered their whole life, basically since when they are kids, now when they are adult, they are still suffering. So how can they find the happiness?
Well, we each have to find it for ourselves. We can share our prayers, but we can't really, there's nothing we can do for other people if they don't want to listen. They have their own higher power. They have their own, they have their own life to live and their own time to find God. But we can find it for ourselves through prayer and meditation and good intentions and serving others and pausing. If you pause and wait, God will give you an answer. Sometimes it takes a few moments, sometimes it takes weeks. I had quite a bit of resentment with my daughter because she had taken my husband to Russia to a hospital in Russia, and so he was gone and for months, and we didn't know if he was going to live or not, and it was very, very difficult. And I thought, I don't need this resentment. What? It was fear, turned into resentment. It was all my emotions up in arms. And so I was resenting my daughter. And I think that I waited when I asked God, when I told him I was willing to lift it. It took 2 weeks for him to lift that resentment from me. So it can take, I don't know how long for some things. It depends what's happened, right? And how damaged you are, or how fearful you are, and how easy it's going to be for you to let go of, let go and let God, to let go and to turn to God. But it's definitely worth doing because it will turn around. It just takes time.
Thank you so much. So I think we have time for maybe one more question. I'll let Queenie maybe finish off with her question here. Go ahead, Queenie.
Okay, great. I'm unmuted now. Okay, Tammy, thank you so much. You mentioned earlier that you saw your illness as a gift. Now, how can we understand that? Because when you got sick, you were told that you had very few months to live. There was a lot of grief in your family. There was uncertainty. There was pain. There was just the inconvenience of going to see the doctor, traveling from one place to another. So why would you say that your illness was a gift? And whatever it was that you gained, was it worth the price of the uncertainty, the suffering, the pain, the grief that you caused in your family?
Well, for me, it was worth it. For sure. I don't know about the other people, you know, I don't know about them and how they are. I know they're grateful I'm alive. So it's given them that kind of gratitude. But I've also, they've seen a change in me, you know, like when after my surgery and after all the complications and then going to Al-Anon, my daughter came back from Russia and Serbia, where she was with my husband. And she wrote me a little text. She didn't know I'd been doing any of this spiritual work. She wrote me a little text. I wish I had it with me, but she said, Mom, she said, you've changed. She said, you're showing so much kindness and gentleness. It's really nice to see. And I thought, isn't that something that she could see a change? And it's because, like, who knows? I can't tell. I can't tell, but she could tell without even. So do I think it was worth it? Gee, I really think it was worth it. It was a lot of suffering. It's true, but God, I just don't know if there's any other way. Was any other way for me? I don't think there's any other way. So that's just the way it had to be. There's no sense me thinking that I like blaming God or being angry with God for giving me this burden, because this must have been what I needed. Or I wouldn't have got this. I would have got something else. This is what was meant for me.
Wow.
Does that answer your question?
Courtney says yes. Perfect. Tammy, thank you so very much for giving us your time and your wisdom and your experience this afternoon. I think we've all learned a lot. We're all going to benefit. I know there are many people who had written questions also that we weren't able to get to, but I think that will be something that perhaps you can continue discussing in the small groups this afternoon also, or with your friends, and see what kernels of wisdom you can come up amongst each other by sharing.
Yes, thank you. Like all the chats. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful day, and I knew it would be. I was so looking forward to it. I don't know. I just can't. I don't know what to say. You guys, this is profoundly moving, and I'm so happy. And I hope that the rest of the conference goes well for you. As you said, I could join to some of them. So
Wonderful.
We'll see if I have time. I definitely will.
Wonderful.
Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you so very much, Tammy.